Welcome to Customer Love Stories, a podcast where we investigate why certain brands are loved or not by their customers. I'm your host, Robi Ganguly, CEO and co-founder of Apptentive. For those of you who don't know, Apptentive is a Seattle-based voice of the customer solution that allows some of the world's most beloved brands to capture invaluable feedback across the mobile customer journey and take immediate action to win back customers and activate fans at scale. I'm joined today by Doug Chavez from WPP. Doug and I have known each other over a decade. We started working together at Yahoo. We spent some time together at Del Monte, and I've been fortunate to call him an advisor for all of the time that I've been running Apptentive. I love talking to Doug about brands, about emotion, and about how we tell stories. So I'm excited to have him join us today. Welcome, Doug. Thanks for joining us.
Robi, as always, it's great to be with you. And I'm looking forward to great things in the new year. So happy to be here.
Awesome. So you're our inaugural guest, and this is a place where we're going to talk about customer emotion and fandom. And I asked you to show up wearing something about a brand or organization that you're a fan of. Tell us about what you're wearing and who you're a fan of and why.
Yeah, one of the, so the brand that I am really just passionate about, it's really one of the, if I'm buying something for outdoors or even just casual wear, a lot of the times it's this brand. It's Patagonia. Before it was really popular. I've been in love with Patagonia since I was a kid, and their tabloid-sized, catalogs. At a loss of words, their catalogs would come in, and the photography was so amazing. And the photography was submitted. All the photography, except for the clothing shots, was submitted by people wearing Patagonia, taking action shots and sending in. That's what made the catalog. And I always dreamt of I got to get this great, amazing action shot to be in the catalog someday. So they've this connection to the consumer using their product in a way that was really a motive of the brand. That's really stuck with me throughout. And so this hat I've had for years. It's kind of disgusting and ratty, but this is a T-shirt that I love. It starts out with a forest, and the forest is cut down. And then somebody goes and buys the lumber at a lumber store, and then they use that lumber to build a birdhouse. And the bird is literally, the bubble says WTF, and it just cracks me up. And the fact that a brand could put WTF, this shirt is probably 12 years old.
Yep.
I've had this forever, but I saw this in the Patagonia store in San Francisco. I'm like, I have to buy this. But it also goes to prove, the other piece is that this is organic cotton. And until I actually read the story about organic cotton and why it's important in a Patagonia sort of narrative in a catalog, I didn't know the importance of that. But this is made from organic cotton. A lot of the things I look for now are organic cotton, even if they're not Patagonia, because it's amazing. I didn't realize how destructive cotton is, because the amount of water it requires, the amount of pesticide that's used to get the highest yield, that in many cases, after a field has been used for cotton grown the traditional way, it's a brown field. You can never grow anything on that ground again. So it's amazing to think that a crop destroys ground, destroys the land. So it just more the ethos of Patagonia.
Yeah. And you got a picture behind you that is pretty special, and it's related to this. So tell me about that.
I do. This is I think one of the times, second time I met Yvan Chouinard, the founder of Patagonia.
Yeah.
This is when he was giving a speech, and actually it's when a book came out, and the book is called "Let My People Go Surfing." And so Patagonia is based in Ventura, California. And the whole concept is, hey, people, as long as you get your work done, and if the surf is up, go surf, come back and do your work. So let people be passionate about what they're passionate about versus trying to fit them in a form, and they'll perform really well. And so that literally is the basis of the book, but it's more about how he didn't go to business school. He wasn't looking to become a professional manager. But a lot of the things that Patagonia has done, a lot of other companies look at those as models for, hybrid work environments before it was, well before 2021, 2022. This was, this book is 17 years old. even the way they look at childcare. And they make a point of calling it out. It's not daycare, it's childcare. You don't take care of days, you take care of children. And the type of childcare and hybrid and solution they've come up with at the headquarters in Ventura is pretty amazing. And by the way, if Ventura is not exactly like in a big metropolitan area. So if you want to work at Patagonia, Ventura is further up than Santa Barbara, and Santa Barbara is already a hike from LA. So it's almost a mission and a calling to go and work at the company. So it's a brand I've long admired for a variety of things. I love their clothing. He started making clothes out of the back of a car because he started making climbing equipment, pitons for climbing, and then moved into clothing, just stuff that is super sturdy and stands up to the test of time. So yeah, I could talk hours about a variety of ways I love Patagonia, what they stand for, and the fact that I have a backpack back here that is Patagonia. It's kind of ratty and torn up, but this has gone in for repairs, and they send it right back. They're not trying to sell me another one. I still buy plenty of products, but if I don't need to throw this into a landfill, I'm not going to do it. I'll just have them patch it up and send it back.
That's one of the things that they state. They encourage you to send your stuff back, and they say, hey, look, the longer you use it, the less stuff you have to buy, the less stuff we have to actually make, the less stuff we have to put in landfills. So let's all be in this together, right?
Exactly. And they're the first ones, I believe, to start making fleece out of PCR, which is recycled plastic bottles.
Right.
So the amount of virgin fleece that is made, not using recycled materials, but the petroleum levels in that is really high. We all need to use petroleum products for a variety of reasons. But if there's a way to reduce that in clothing and make a more sustainable product, I'm all for it.
A couple things in this, right? So first is, when I think about fans, I think about that root word fanatic, right? Fanatical. And clearly you know more about the company than the average human, right? The average person who's come into contact with it. But you probably know more about the company than the average person who buys their stuff. You read and learned about organic cotton. You have a shirt that's 12 years old. You have a bag behind you. You've got a picture with the founder and CEO. Like, you started out as a kid being immersed in these glossy catalogs that had consumers actually showing themselves using it. And you said, I want to be like that. I want to aspire to do that action shot that shows up in a Patagonia catalog. But what grabbed you was that? What kept you?
The attention to detail. The way their clothing is designed is very much in tune to real people using it. Those use cases, that feedback loop, to create a better product. So one is the products are pretty well designed for people who actually are using the sport versus someone who's just buying a casual piece of clothing.
Yeah, help me understand that. Like, I know our audience doesn't know you as well as I do, but you've been to multiple continents. You've traveled all around the world. You are known for your vest wearing. It's just the truth, right? People know Doug Chavez. They know he's got Patagonia vests, right? It's a identity, but you're an outdoorsy, active cyclist. So what's an example of that? Like, that quality of thought that goes into a design of a product where you're like, yeah, I press stuff to the limit, and this is where I found them doing something.
It's funny you talk about the vest. I've been wearing the vest long before it was on trend, right? So, and so I've had multiple vests. So I still own all of the ones I've bought, including this. It was actually a cycling vest. So it was windproof in the back and breathed in the back, and had a big zipper pocket across the back. It was great. So I would wear that a lot. Then I bought a nano puff vest years ago. I still have it, and then I bought another one. I think I recycled one. But this latest one that I bought a few years back, it's something as small as, they probably get feedback that, hey, it gets chilly out there. And so when you zip up that vest, there's just a piece of fleece about this big right at the chin, so that when your chin touches it, it's not a cold piece of vest. It's fleece material. So it's little things like that, to the way seams are cut and sewn, to give you that much more range of motion in the activity that you're doing.
Right.
So, I think the first Patagonia jacket I had was a red Patagonia Cirque jacket. And they had a powder skirt inside the jacket. I'd never seen that before, right? So I was a kid in the Midwest. You think I was getting powder? No. But the concept of like, oh, this is cool. This is what they're really like, the guys who are in those photos, that's what they're doing. And they have these powder skirts. And so that's the kind of stuff that the attention to detail has always been something I've been a huge fan of, probably because, my dad is in orthodontics and orthodontic surgery. And that's like seeing a patient over a long period of time, and it moves at a glacial pace. Think about how many times you get your orthodontics adjusted, or surgical cases that when they have to cut the jaw. It's just things move at a very slow pace, but it's all about very meticulous work. And so I have an appreciation for that. And they're just really meticulous about their design, and I love it.
Makes sense. That's a really cool example too, because I hadn't thought about it that way, but I definitely noticed that there are some jackets I wear where I'm like, oh, that's cold. And then I've definitely noticed that there are some where I'm like, it's fine, no big deal. And now that I'm thinking about it, 2 pieces of Patagonia in my wardrobe, and I'm a big North Face fan, but I don't think they get that right. I think that you're touching on something where it's just like a tiny detail, but played out over thousands of interactions makes a huge deal when you're out there and you're
Yeah.
cold.
Yeah. In some ways, it reminds me of another person. I won't go down a track on this, but I hate to even talk about it to a degree. It's of Steve Jobs. But if you've ever read the book about Steve Jobs, there's several books out there, but he talks about his dad was building furniture with him. And his dad made him stain the back of the chest of drawers. He's like, no one looks at this. Why are we doing this? This is a waste of time. He's like, because you're doing it and your name is on it and it's there. And so it needs to look good. Mm-hmm. So that passion about what you do and really taking ownership of that. And that carried through, the first Macintosh. Of course, it was never meant to be opened by a consumer because it had a special screwdriver, because he was very much about closed system environments, including the hardware. But if you ever got one of those star-shaped screwdrivers and opened it up and you pulled the lid off and you looked inside the lid, you know what's in there? The signature of everyone who worked on that product. Because like his dad, he's like, your name's on this. The attention to detail matters. No one's going to lift this lid up and see it. Now, eventually we did, of course, but people didn't know that was going to ever be seen by a consumer.
I love that. That's great. So, all right. So we got a bunch of interesting points about why you are a fan of Patagonia and how they not just grabbed you, but they kept you and they kept making progress. And the relationship to your dad as an orthodontic surgeon is that of change over time and a commitment and feedback loop that allows to get to the progress and the end states you want as a consumer. Let's turn over to you as a professional, right? So tell us a little bit more about what you do now in your role, what you're responsible for, and tell me how that connects to creating fans.
Sure. So I've spent the entirety of my career at the intersection of media and technology and commerce, quite honestly. And so I've been with Geometry, which is now VML1, Commerce, which is part of the WPP family. So I've been with WPP for a little over 4 years, and I've moved over to the mothership, if you will, on the partnerships team. So I'm looking after retail, commerce, and other types of partnerships in that sphere, if you will. I can't get into too much detail about it, but we'll have some news probably in the next quarter or so. We can probably talk more publicly about. But I love it because just in the world of retail, as you know, as we've talked about here, but there are others who are fanatical about why they buy from Neiman's, why they buy from Nordstrom, why they like a certain grocery store, right? Whether the grocery store is in Boston, San Francisco, Seattle, why they love it and why they will always go to that store for certain things. And sometimes they don't go to that store. Like, hey, I want really good fish. I have to go to this other retailer to get that. But everything else, I go here. So people have their reasons. And so, COVID's been an accelerant as much as we hate it. and I hate it with a passion, quite honestly. But it's been an accelerant for grocery shopping online, retail shopping, at other types of stores as well. But people, specifically where I've focused in the last several years, has been in the grocery space. A lot of our clients are CPGs, and people are entrenched. You do something for 8 weeks, you've developed a habit. Clearly, we're longer into that type of a pattern, more than 8 weeks than we thought it would be. But that's developed a different relationship with stores and how consumers are coming in, either using an app, using a website, or using last mile intermediary type delivery services. And so I think there's a ton of opportunity there for brands and for retailers, and quite honestly for customers, because the customer feedback is so important these days that brands have become flexible and nimble enough to adapt to change their shopping process to meet the demand. Quite honestly, it's almost, you'll laugh at this. I was talking about consumers in shopping and why, getting something from Amazon in a week to 24 hours to getting it within an hour or two, right? Why is that? That's been compressed for a number of reasons. But if you think about the types of apps that these consumers have been using on these devices for 15 years, it's not just how you shop for food, it's how you shop for relationships. You can make all the fun you want about Tinder or Hinge or any of the other apps out there, but they've taken the time cycle to meet someone down from weeks to minutes. Literally, think about that. And so that's I believe that's had an impact on how consumers use these apps and what their expectations are for how quickly they can get something delivered to their door. Whether that is some ice cream, a deodorant, a bottle of liquor, or a relationship. I know that sounds crazy, but I do think there is a connection there with these expectations that consumers have, and how and why, especially retailers have had to become so nimble to adjust and make sure they can meet the consumer expectation that much more quickly.
I think that the thing I'm hearing you say, right, is you have this job at WPP where you're focused on retail partnerships. You're helping large retail companies grow, right? You're helping them acquire more customers, retain those customers. You're helping them do it through a mix of media, like advertising spend, messaging, but also offer matching, right? Like what we do digitally allows this consumer to then get their groceries in 20 minutes as opposed to 4 hours, or lets them get it at home as opposed to having to pack 3 kids up and go to the store. Is that right? Am I understanding that?
Yeah.
So then, through that lens, I think one of the things I'm hearing you say is that a change that has been happening for a decade is that our expectations are that time and friction decreases, right? That our expectations are that we can push button and find people we care about and get the food that we need and the goods that we have to purchase, all of that faster with less friction. Obviously, in the place that you are, you're helping these brands try to get these customers and acquire them more quickly, but you also see the ways in which it breaks down, right? Like the ways in which maybe people are not competing as effectively as they need to. And that leads to this shift in preference. And one of the things that you've always taught me more than anything about is like long-term brand preference is really important to engage in, invest in, and cultivate. But it sounds like you're saying, hey, the last 20 months, there's a lot of brand preferences that are breaking because the expectations have changed. Is that right?
Yeah, that's part of it. I think it's a couple of things that you've hit on. I've said, of course, I said it sort of off the cuff in an inarticulate manner. But there are expectations, but there's also a bit of CX, the experience that people are having on these sites from a retail perspective and from the brands that are on the shelves perspective. So how do we come together versus just selling a brand advertising? How do we think about the journey? How do we find small ways to, surprise and delight consumers along that journey to get them to convert and to become those lifelong fans? So here's the thing, even one of the things that happens through shopping is like, there's been such a dash to get the products delivered to your door. Let's say just talk about in grocery, that the brand I want, most of the time, it's gone. And if I want it, I've got to go to the store maybe, and even then I don't get it. So that brand that fills that second spot, what happens to them? Do consumers start to adopt them as well? So being that second brand may not be a bad thing.
Tell me more about that, right? Like in the context of what the kind of work you do is, how do you help brands be the second brand and take advantage of that opportunity where there's breakdown in inventory, for example, and become the first brand because they won the opportunity?
Yeah, in one case, there is a brand. This is back at my days on Geometry. Now, Geometry, I ran our digital commerce group and in our media practice, and there, when we were already working with them to begin with. They were a small challenger brand in the cleaning space, and then when something happened where Clorox can't fulfill because they've just been swamped, it's gone off the shelves. A small challenger brand who could never get space on a shelf now has space on the shelf. It's a different product, but it still, in some ways, solves a similar type need. So being that, one is like exposing them to a new brand. Then maybe they become more loyal to that brand for a couple of other reasons. Who knows? I think that's really interesting to understand that dynamic, but also think about the conversation in that shopper journey and what that consumer experience needs to be the first time that converts, and how do you then use that to repeat the consumer putting that back in the cart the next time. So it's not the second, it's the first brand they put in there. And you're doing that through a lot of storytelling around, in this case, it was the product and how the product is made and produced from a farm all the way to the type of packaging they used. So in many ways, it has some elements of things that Patagonia or other brands have done to tell a story.
I was gonna say, this is really what I'm picking up from what you're suggesting, is that moment when you started to see these glossy poster-sized catalogs and it grabbed you. This challenger brand you're advising was finding itself alone on a shelf because Clorox was out. And then when it was taken home, it sounds like the brand was able to say, hey, we've got our own glossy attraction, and it's our story where we come from this farm. And in our story of where we come from this farm and how the packaging is made is a story that if you pay attention and you invest in learning about it, you're going to walk away thinking about us differently than Clorox. Yeah. And then the people who do that, if the next time they go to the store, once again, they're able to fulfill their need with this brand as opposed to Clorox, then they start to go down this path of becoming a fan of them. How do you connect those dots and really work with a brand to ensure that they fulfill that promise?
It's a lot of, and I haven't done these focus groups in a while, but a lot of the times the agency team works closely with the brand team at the client, and they do, these things come out through either ethnographic research or other types of focus group studies. That's part of it. The other is, what cool creative data can you tell from the feedback data? Like either by something they're putting in their cart or by something that they're not putting in their cart, but they have browsed. How can you start to, it's almost like the Matrix. Like not everyone can see it, but there's interesting data there. You just have to find the lens to see that, start telling that story and sussing out these little details. I think that's one, certainly we're very data driven. That's one way that we do it, on top of the sort of concrete feedback you get from a consumer in ethnography or through, focus group testing.
Yeah. And it seems to me, obviously, at Apptentive, we believe that this is important to the world going forward. But it seems to me that what opportunities present themselves for any challenger brand in this similar scenario is if you start to show up, on the shelf alone, and you start to win as quickly as possible, figuring out what's resonating with the consumers who then choose you, maybe by default first, but then proactively later. Like what helps them actually say, yeah, I bought into your story. I'm a total fan of this. What is it that makes them say, I want more, right? I want to learn more about you. And I think what you're saying is brands have to get better actually looking for and seeking that data out, right? To
Mhm.
reinforce that. What are some of the tools that you tend to see working for people who are leading the charge here, right? So if somebody's coming and listening to us and getting to know you for the first time, like what would you say? Hey, go do this thing. It's important to turn it into data. And I ask this knowing you well enough to know that over the decade plus time that we've spent together, that you're always looking for more data. You're always sort of hungry and pressing, nope, more,
Mhm.
nope, more. So how would you advise somebody to go get more data that helps you with this fandom?
Yeah, I think at the sort of the simplest way to approach it is putting my hat on from my days at Del Monte Foods, right? So 17 brands across fruit and veg to pet foods and snacks. Where people are much more passionate about a milk-bone dog biscuit than they are about a can of peaches. Although someone who's really into baking might tell you differently, but the emotion around a pet is much more engaging. And so one of the things we did with a lot of our brands was we did a lot of consumer studies, right? We'd ask for feedback, and Del Monte was one of the first brands who did social feedback to do product development with. I think it was either Snossages. I know people are always laugh at that name. It's a great T-shirt though. Snossages, or it was like another a Scooby snack treat kind of a thing. And we used feedback within a social environment. So we listened to the consumer, where they will easily rip you to shreds, as you know, but they'll equally praise you as well. And so you have to listen to the consumer. I know that sort of sounds sort of obvious, but a lot of brands weren't doing that to the degree that Del Monte was looking to do some testing and learning around that. So yeah, you can use social listening, you can use engagement groups there to help understand what product attributes are that are most endearing or important to the consumer or the person buying it, because a pet's really not going to give you a ton of feedback. To the typical, I ate a lot of M&Ms standing behind a one-way mirror listening to focus groups. So I think those types of things are important. The last I would say is even doing, if you've got the budget, doing a brand lift study with online ads. That's been really impactful. Even using it, doing A/B testing with search. Even if someone says no, it's still an answer. It's still a piece of feedback. And how do you use that? And so you have to start to sift through that to understand, consumer sentiment.
Right. Right. And I think that the consistent thing that you have been touching on is that this is iterative, right? That you're always kind of like working on this. And as you're working on this with the aim to get better, I think companies struggle connecting the dots between this is the right thing to do to get better by our customers, and then this is the ROI thing to do. And in the marketing space, a lot of times today and tomorrow are about how do I spend in order to get ROI. You're not talking just about spending. You're talking about investing energy and time in dissecting data and iterating, and then taking it actually through the product development process and continuing to make that product better, not just spending more on ads, but spending more internally. How do you make that business case? Because I think that you've done this across multiple brands, making a longer term business case of like connecting digital data to actual customer operations and everything in between. How do you make that ROI case?
Yeah, I think it is. One is, especially, I guess it's sort of like almost armchair quarterbacking in a way to answer the question. But if you look at the types of data sets we're looking at within Del Monte, whether that was through consumer surveys, focus groups, brand lift studies, is having all of that data sit in a central repository and using it in multiple ways. I also worked at Banana Republic, where I was on the digital marketing side, running website optimization through email and a variety of tactics. So you think about the feedback, the browsing history, whether someone comes to a brand site, but I don't, we've talked about brand sites and what those things, what their place in the ecosystem is like. But if you've got a site like Banana Republic has, the feedback loop, the constant amount of data, you have to think about how do we use that data to monetize our learning. And so in the world, with my armchair quarterbacking piece is, the easy answer is central repository to look at this data and then mine it, right? So use machine learning to run a variety of scenarios through the data to better understand it. So the reason why data is so important, the more data you collect and the more times and different ways you can analyze that data in new and different ways that you are doing today that you didn't know you could do 2 years ago, but you still have that data, that's going to help you. And so the power of machine learning to do that in a very efficient way, and then to take action on that, that is why data is so key to understanding the consumer. Very long-winded answer, I guess.
No, well, I think what you are talking about and some of the things that I've seen you do is the assumption that technology will get better at helping you make sense of data is implicit in a lot of the things you've done. And I think what you're saying is something we're starting to see brands just now in 2022 wake up to, which is, I have all this implicit analytics data, and I have invested a ton of time and energy in taking that analytics data and putting it into centralized repositories, and then to try and take action on them. Now it's time for me to take all this explicit data, feedback signals from social, from in-app, from on website, from ethnographic studies and research and focus groups, and putting it together in one area where across the organization, people who care about understanding the customer can make sense of it, with the belief that the technology will get better and better to make it easier, right? So I think, to me, that's been something that you are often ahead of, and you're successful at getting people to invest in that. And one of the ways that you're able to get people to invest in that is you take sometimes a methodical, incremental approach. Where do you start, right? Like, where do you start to get wins with people so that they become a fan of this internal approach of like, hey, buy into what Doug says, collect more actual explicit feedback data, and then use it to make the product and the process and the advertising and the storytelling better? How do you get those incremental wins?
Yeah, I think part of that is having, the same conversation multiple times. One of my, not a direct manager, but somebody above me at Del Monte Foods used to talk about, Del Monte is a 100-plus-year-old company, and I came from Yahoo to a CPG company that was 100+ years old. And one of the great pieces of advice I was told, like, hey, they're not going to move that fast. It's like an apple in the dip. You got to dip it a lot of times for sometimes that caramel to really stick to the piece of fruit. And so it's looking at those conversations and listening to them to understand, like, what are the pieces that they actually, like, their eyebrow lights up a little bit, their eyes light up, and use that to go back and say, okay, I'm going to go find a piece of data that I think that person will be interested in, or another brand who is similar, who's done something that, so it's like trolling through, Forrester, if you've got access to it, or, doing a lot of reading. You probably know I am, like you, I'm a voracious consumer of data and reports. I may not read the entire thing. I read the bullets and I tuck that away and I figure out where to use it to tell a narrative to get someone to become a believer. And so that's kind of my approach. Is you're never going to get, very rarely do you get someone to say, yep, I'm in, let's do the whole thing, kit and caboodle. But if you can get them to listen to one little piece, that is where I start. And it's just a small data point to believe in why data is important and why they should listen.
We've seen you as a fan of Patagonia. You know a lot about them. You're an expert in many ways about their history and why they exist. I mean, you have many photos, but not that many framed. And the fact that you have one of you and the founder framed is quite telling. What do you like as a fan in general, not just Patagonia? And why does it lead you to join companies you're fans of?
I like the storytelling of it. The sort of the history of of where the companies come from, where they're going. I think mostly where they're going, where there's an opportunity, and those are the things that I've always like that's a cool journey. I want to take that trip. Right. And that's led me to places. So that, quite honestly, that's one of the things that led me to Yahoo. When Yahoo came after me, it was because we had done some really interesting things in the McDonald's business, because we had taken a different look at how to run an agency business, a creative agency business, to really inform the media strategy, and have a really true symbiotic relationship. McDonald's, I became passionate about working in the McDonald's business. My first job at Leo Burnett, I ended up in the group, the interactive marketing group, and taking a database marketing program called McMoms and turning that into, there's another great use case of data, right? Turning that into an online community on AOL and MSN when they were, sort of gated communities around parenting. And that was incredible. We would do auditoriums. If you remember the days of, doing auditoriums on AOL with guest speakers, they were typing. There was no voice. It was all, texting in an auditorium setting. Great information about parenting, from bedwetting to breastfeeding to what are the best games to get for your kids? What's the most age appropriate? So connecting parents who have this like voracious appetite to know as much as they can to make the best decisions they can around these topics. That was really cool. But I also got to know a lot about a massive business, right? And getting to understand, well, why doesn't McDonald's do this? Well, because they need instant scale, right? They have to go into 13,000 plus restaurants. Now think about that as a 20-something on the business. I didn't know a lot of things, like why don't they do, fresh banana or strawberry shake? Well, they can't grow the fruit fast enough. The consumption is so huge. So to me, that was really fascinating. And so I left the agency business and came back, and I looked at how, when I came back to the agency business, I'd seen how we were working on, the digital business. I ended up running when I was at DDB, Tribal DDB, running McDonald's digital business in the US. And it was just media buys being thrown over the wall, the creative team going and building it. And so there wasn't a lot of interest on the creative team. And I'm like, hey, we can make this better by combining the planning here and getting smarter with the messaging for the audience. If we know who the audience is and we read the media brief, we can probably make the creative better. And guess what? We did. That happened by asking the head of marketing in the US, like, hey, just give me a hall pass and let us into any meeting we want to go to for a quarter. And if it doesn't work, I won't ask again. It worked. And that filtered through all the way to how the agency teams, even within DDB working together, it led to 2 Super Bowl spots, and that was really the catalyst. It just blew the top off of things, and we won the first Cyber Lion for that. We won at the London International Festival, and other things. But that was transformational. But I loved working in the business because you looked at it from a variety of different angles, and people that were really passionate about car tuning. It's something I never even heard about. There's like this whole subculture. How do we talk to them? We started doing podcasts back in 2004 about car tuning with McDonald's. And there was an audience, there was a passionate audience there. So it was a fun business to work on from that perspective. But I just like in general, the story of McDonald's growth. The same with Del Monte. Like, again, brands just growing, into like a business that started, in the Monterey Bay of California. Simple, fruit packing, or in fact, it was really green beans that got that business going. And so learning the different aspects of how to grow that business, how to get people, excited and interested in the brands. And then, of course, when they, acquired pet brands, that was even more so. So those are the types of things that I think have been, I think those sorts of stories. But I'm passionate about other brands that I haven't worked at. Would I have loved to have worked at Apple? Probably in the earlier days, because they had a mission. I like brands that have a real like we're going to change the world mentality. And Del Monte certainly had that, especially early on. If you go and look at the history books and some of the stuff which you do when you come on into the company, you do. I mean, even Disney, I was just at Disneyland. I'd never been to Disneyland until week before last. My first time, been to Disney World several times as a kid. Always wanted to go to Disneyland, so we went. And the story of Walt Disney, I think, is pretty interesting. He's a kid who, you know, was an animator, like, you know, drawing on paper, and turned that into, an empire. But it is the approach that Disney has always had with the experience. They care so much about the fine detail of the experience people have with an animation or in an amusement park. Well beyond like, oh, I need a bathroom. Oh, there's a bathroom right there. It's like crazy how well thought out it is. And it goes back to like Disneyland. I like, why is this castle so small? Because compared to Orlando, this castle is itty bitty. And so you read the history of it, it's small because he ran out of money. People thought he was going to fail, and he mortgaged his house to build Disneyland. He could, in fact, little known fact, until the other week, I was doing some research. Disney didn't even own the hotel, Disneyland Hotel. The Disney Corporation didn't own that, I think, until the 2000s when Eisner came in, because no hotel chain was willing to invest in building a hotel in Anaheim, which was a bunch of orange groves at the time. And he had no more money. The bank's like, we're not giving you another dime. So, you know, to the crazy ones, as you know, that Apple campaign had said, and there's something, I took a picture of this on my phone. I was walking through Disney and I saw this, literally I took a picture because I thought it was amazing. And early in my career, I left my job in Chicago and moved to Boston. I packed up my car and left. And the story just kind of confirms like why all these things about Disney and people doing passionate things is the power of people and passion is it's unstoppable. But he says here, it was July 1923. I packed all of my worldly goods, a pair of trousers, a checkered coat, a lot of drawing materials, and the last of the fairy tale reels we had made in a kind of frayed cardboard suitcase. And with that wonderful audacity of youth, I went to Hollywood, arriving there with just $40. It's comical. It was a big day. The day I got on the Santa Fe, California Limited, I was just free and happy, Walt Disney. And, I left the world of McDonald's advertising and moved to Boston and started a company out there based on things I'd learned on the McDonald's business around parenting and connecting families with the care providers that serve them. And I literally packed up my car and left in 3:00 in the morning. I was so excited.
Yeah, and I think Disney's like Apple, one of those iconic global brands where people bring them up and say, oh my gosh, they do such a good job. But part of the reason why is that there's a story that people want to attach to around it, right? Like, why'd you take a picture of that? Because it's reminiscent of a story you actually told yourself and a journey you went on. And Disney's so good at kind of highlighting that story in multiple areas and bringing you along. And then it's not just the story and the history, but it's then the idea of like where it's going and joining on for where it's going that makes for you that like equation of being a fan. If you like the story and you want to tell it, and then you want to see where it goes and you think you can be a part of it seems to me like, hey, that's a recipe for Doug Chavez to be a fan of yours, to be kind of along on this trip.
Yeah.
What's the recipe for losing you as a fan?
Not listening.
Yeah.
Just completely not listening. As like in the world of brands with interacting with consumers, not listening is I think the death knell for brands.
Yeah.
And you'll lose me.
And what's an example of that?
Even if I don't like your response, but if you listened, that's still I'll stick around. But if you never respond, you never show up, chances are pretty good I'm not coming back ever.
What's an example?
I'm trying to think about an example of a brand that just didn't listen. There is a biking computer. I'm an avid cyclist, although right now I feel like I'm not so avid at the moment.
It's winter in Chicago. I forgive you.
But they basically had the computer market for bike computers. Their user manuals are horrible. Their customer service is not responsive. There's no social listening, nothing. And so when that device that I liked and I loved, it was great. It worked fine. When it finally broke, I'm like, I could repair this, but I want to ask them what, and they just never responded. I'm like, I'm done.
Yep.
I'm done. And so I literally never went back to that. And, there was, another small startup brand based in the US down in Atlanta, and they're really eager about, doing it in a different way to make things easier and having better support for their customers. And now I'd say, I haven't done the research, but I'd say they probably own more than 50% of the market of cycling computers and other types of smart trainers and so forth. Because all of these devices are now connected, and this other company had to go do acquisitions to do that. It's not the same.
Well, I think the point there for sure is similar to your Clorox story, right? Like there's room for number two when number one falters, maybe because of inventory and supply constraints, or maybe because of an own goal of not listening. And the quickest way to the bottom of the stack for Doug Chavez is to not listen. Yeah. So Doug, it's been super, super awesome to talk about this. Really appreciate you joining me on the first version of this podcast. And to everybody who's listening to this, welcome to Customer Love Stories, where we're going to be talking more and more about how to earn customers' love and hopefully what mistakes to avoid in breaking up with them and losing their hearts. That's for sure. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for having me.